Okay, what can I say, folks? Sometimes you just need a thick one. Wait, no, that's not what I meant. Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back today to talk some big books. I did a video not that long ago where I said, hey, are you tired of some big books? Well, here are some shorter options for fantasy fans. And I mean by that is most fantasy fans find a book that's 500 pages or less. They kind of add a little shorter. So I want to talk today about some of my favorite big books. So if you're looking to get lost in some really big boys, I think this will be the video for you. I'm going to talk about some of my favorites here. And when I say big boys, I mean these are about 1,000 pages or more. Now, all these things are just kind of vary. I'm going to mention the page number, but there's so many different editions of some of these books and things like that that I feel like maybe you will have a different number here. I'm just going off some of the paperback editions that I have. So most of my viewers here are fantasy fans, and I feel like that's going to be the people I'm aiming this at because they do tend to love some really thick books. But I think some of these historical fiction ones that I've come across recently, they're quite thick as well. And that's a good place to start. Let's go ahead and begin this by talking about some historical fiction or maybe some classics. Here's begin with Shogun. Shogun, James Clavell, 1,152 pages. I read this one earlier this year. Probably the book of the year for me so far. It's an amazing journey. What I love about this book is it does Stranger in a Strange Land better than anything I've ever seen before. It's one of those where I say, take your time with it, because I feel like you can feel like you're on that journey with Blackthorn if you just take your time and enjoy it a little bit. Now, that's going to be the recurring theme with a lot of these books, is I know some people feel like it's a race. It's not a race. Big books should be enjoyed. You know what? You should feel like you're going on the journey with those characters. And with Shogun, I took 3 months to read it, and it was awesome because I felt like I was in ancient Japan with Blackthorn in this Stranger in a Strange Land tale that is second to none. It's probably the best I've ever seen in that little format there. So yeah, that's a great book. It's a huge journey, and I've done a full review for that one on the channel if you want to know a little bit more. So check that out if you are curious about making that trip with Blackthorn into ancient Japan here. The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. You guys know that I do love this one. I push this one on everyone who has not read it. 976 pages. It's weird to me to think that I read this when I was 15 years old, and not just because of the massive page count, but also because of the content. Now, I'm going to say up front, this ain't a book for everybody, guys. When you're dealing with things that happened the way the world was about 1,000 years ago, yeah, maybe things are going to be a little different. And that's very one of those books, like I said, isn't going to land for everybody. I feel like fantasy fans are going to love it, but if you're easily bothered by some things, like I said, the way that the caste system was set up at that time period is probably going to upset some people, but that's just history. I always say that the greatest grimdark out there, guys, is just go back through world history, a good 1,000 years prior, and you can see, yeah, things were pretty rough. But I love Pillars of the Earth. I think it's an amazing story. I always have a hard time selling it to people because they're like, well, this sounds great. What's it about? And I'm like, oh, well, these people are building a cathedral over the course of like 40 years or, around the year 1000 in England. And they're like, that doesn't sound very exciting. I'm like, shut up, just read it. And everybody that does read it, it usually slaps a good old 5-star rating on it, as I do with Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. This one is clocking in at 1,037 pages. I know this book's taken a lot of heat recently. To me, it's one of those where I'm like, look, I understand why people feel that way. What I don't understand is how was this considered the great American novel for like 75 years, and now people act like it should just be like I don't know, if the table leg is like wobbly and you just need something. That's not it. That's not it. I understand why people feel that way about it. Me, I'm able to separate, this is the way life was in that time period, and the characters in that story didn't find it unusual. I don't feel like it's glorifying it. I don't feel like it's romanticizing anything. And I talked at length about this when I reviewed Gone with the Wind about a year ago. And that I love the story because I feel like it is just a snapshot in time of America at probably its lowest moment ever. And I think that's something that needs to be recognized, so we don't make those mistakes again, is the way I always look at those things. But with this, I feel like it's the first book that I think I read where the author is writing an unlikable protagonist, but yet you're rooting for her anyway, because you will love to hate Scarlet, you will hate to love her, but damn it, you will. Because what I love about Scarlet is I feel like she's the first like American literary feminist icon. She never gives up. She gets put through the ringer, and she always gets up, dusts herself off, and damn it, she always finds a way to overcome everything. So it's one of those characters I feel like you will find yourself rooting for, even though she is not a good person. She is not a good person at all, and you'll just want to wring her neck, but you'll be like, but I want you to succeed here. So I think that that's just an amazing, amazing literary accomplishment by Miss Mitchell there. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas, 1,276 pages. I'm talking, of course, about the unabridged version of the story, which is the version that you should read. I know a lot of people read the abridged version in high school, and look, that's a coherent story, but you're missing so much of the story. If you're basically reading about a quarter of the story if you read the abridged version. The most amazing thing about the Count of Monte Cristo is when I was reading it, the unabridged version, because we read the abridged version in high school, and it was like when I was about 20, I went ahead and picked up the unabridged version because it stuck in my head so much, and I was blown away that I had never read a book with that many plot twists in it. And I'm talking, it's like every 30 pages or something huge. I saw like a meme one time, and someone was like, here are the little post-it note, little tabs that you stick on the sides. I think they're just called post-it. I don't know. I saw somebody that used that, and they said, where I've got each one of these is every time there's a plot twist in the Count of Monte Cristo. And it was like, it was a ton of them. So yeah, just an amazing book, and I think it is the quintessential tale of revenge. Everything that has been doing a revenge plot has been using this as the blueprint for hundreds of years now. It's just an incredible story that was so far ahead of its time, and it's just been done over and over again, and people always go back to this, be like, what would Dumas have done here? And it's something that I think all classic authors who love to write about the revenge genre have kind of go back. This is how you do long form, slow burn revenge over decades. It's incredible. So if you don't mind spending a good 1,300 pages with some of the best characters that you're going to read in all of fiction, then I see definitely do that one as soon as possible. It's like if there's one classic you haven't read, it's Count of Monte Cristo. You don't mind big books, please do this immediately. Just barely miss my top 10 books of all time, because this is probably my favorite book that they made us read in high school, even if it wasn't the unabridged version. How about some horror and post-apocalyptic? Now, this one is probably the shortest one on here, and the reason I'm kind of skirting that 1,000 pages rule, and this one's, clocking it at a lower 803 pages, so it's not like it's short. It's because I want more people to read it. I read it earlier this year. This is Blackwater by Michael McDowell, and what I just love about this is there's something about Southern Gothic that's always spoken to me. It's just something that I cannot get enough of, but also when you combine that with coming of age, and when you combine that with slice of life and going through the decades of someone's life. This does all these things. It does all of them multiple times, because you're dealing 50 years of the Caskey family here. 50 years you're going through the generations with this family, and you're getting to know those kids, and then those kids grow up, and you get to know their kids, and it just keeps growing and growing to the point where you really feel like you know this family. And the thing is, as a reader, you're like, I know that there's a big scary monster involved here, but no one in the family knows this for decades, and it just kind of helps give that sense of dread that I think makes horror really, really work. Amazing, amazing story. I would recommend this to everybody until everyone reads it. I think if you're a big McCammon fan, if you're a big Stephen King fan, you'd love the Southern Gothic just subgenre. I think this is going to be a home run for you. I think any McCammon fan is going to just eat this up. You like Boy's Life, I think you would eat this story up. Speaking of Robert McCammon, Swan Song. This one clocks at 956 pages, and it doesn't even feel that long, guys, because that is probably the fastest that I have ever read a book that length. I could not stop turning the pages in this book. It was just such a wild, wild ride. And this is the one that gets compared with The Stand by Stephen King a lot. And I can see that. I can see that there's a lot of hat tips to it. You can tell Robert McCammon was a fan of The Stand. It's no question. I think they're different, though. I don't feel like you have to like one more than the others. Like I just talked about recently with Red Rising and Sun Eater, where everybody feels like they've got to pick a side. They've got to like only one. No, they're both amazing books, and they're both different enough that I don't feel like you have to choose one or say one's better than the other. So whereas The Stand is like you're seeing the breakdown of society happen in real time, this is, hey, the bombs drop and this is the aftermath. This is us trying to put society back together after, nuclear winter has kind of wore off. It's great stuff, man. What I love about this is he has such a massive cast, and I don't feel like there's anyone you're going to be indifferent to. You're going to love to hate some. You're going to hate to love some. You're going to really give a damn about every character one way or the other. And sometimes, yeah, the way that McCammon can do, you can be like, what the hell is wrong with this character? Like you can say to people in real life, I think. So McCammon, amazing, amazing character writer. And I feel like he does it as good as Stephen King. That's the highest compliment that I think I could give an author, is that he writes characters as good as Stephen King. An absolutely amazing post-apocalyptic book, guys. I think you should definitely check it out. Now, I want to preface this one by saying with sequels. I didn't want to do a ton of sequels because I don't want to tell you, hey, you got to read 4 or 5 books before you get to this sequel, but I would be remiss not to bring them up because some of my favorite books and series are going to be a sequel within that series, and they are usually chonkers because I am a fantasy fan after all. So I had to begin with Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, 1,088 pages. What made this book so amazing for me? Did you guys ever watch the TV show Lost? I loved Lost. And we'll talk about the ending. That's for another episode. We'll do that on Mike's Media Reviews. It'll be crazy. But what I loved about Lost is when, sometimes they'd hit where they do this thing where okay, here's the real plot line, and here's the character we're focusing on, and we're going to kind of be going back and forth between their present-day storyline and their flashback history and showing, and eventually the episode would converge at the perfect moment, and everything would make sense. That's what happened with Words of Radiance. I felt like they were doing this flashback within the regular story for the character Shallan, who's a very divisive character. And at this time, I was still kind of undecided about Shallan. And it was such an amazing, amazing backstory. And the big moment, the revelation hit right at the perfect time as what was going on in the main plot line, and it was incredible. I loved this book so much. I've said that this is probably my only 5-star that I would give to a fantasy book that I've read in the last 10 years because it's just perfectly paced. You never ever feel like, oh God, this is so long. And I feel like it is worth reading Way of Kings, which is amazing in its own right, just to read Words of Radiance because it is the best book I think that Brandon Sanderson has written. And Stormlight Archive slaps. It's awesome. It is. But for me, Words of Radiance was just the best of the best. And it couldn't get any better. And I don't think it has, but we'll talk about that when the truth comes out here this December. I'm very, very excited for that book. But I love Stormlight Archive. But yeah, Words of Radiance is without a doubt my favorite one. The Lord Ruler. That was when he became the Lord Ruler for me. I was like, this guy knows what the hell he's doing. Plus, there's a lot of ℕ𝕤𝕤 in that book, and I love ℕ𝕤𝕤. Let's talk about Storm of Swords. We got to talk about A Storm of Swords by George R. R. Martin. 1,177 pages. This is my favorite single fantasy book of all time. If you're making me pick one fantasy book, this is it. And I think it's because he took those amazing plot threads that he had going in A Game of Thrones and in Clash of Kings, and they all converged at just the right moment to make just an incredible, incredible story that could have been the climax of the series if he had wanted to be. He could have ended it probably in this book because it feels not like the ending, but it feels like an ending. And it's great. It's just, you can't believe that you've taken some of these characters that you could not stand them. You thought they were irredeemable in those first couple of books. And by book 3, you're rooting for these characters. And that was the first time I had experienced something like that. So this will always be something special to me. I've reread it so many times. I did it last year. Again, it's just the best. There's not a single page that I would cut out of A Storm of Swords. It's one of those where it will have you emotionally exhausted, where you feel like you got to put the book down sometimes, but then you'll be running back over to pick it up because it's just so amazing. You got to know what happens next. There's a reason all those people that were like, man, Game of Thrones was the best in season 3 or 4. I wonder why that is. Because it was based on the best fantasy book ever written. That's why, because this book is just incredible and it has aged incredibly well, and it'll be hard to top. A book I kind of compared to it, and I thought that was a pretty high compliment, was Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill, probably the newest one I have on here. 1,007 pages. Now, when I saw this book, I said, this is the problem with self-pub. They need an editor. They need somebody to pare down all the fluff because this is just stupid. And then I read it and I said, I stand corrected because there is absolutely zero fluff in this book. And the reason I compare it to Storm of Swords, besides the word count, is because he does this thing where he has 17, and I'm not being hyperbolic, 17 different plot threads, and every single one of them are awesome, and the pacing is perfect. There's never a moment where I'm like, I don't want to go to these people. I want to know what's going on with these characters. Hey, you haven't told me about these characters in a long time, right? You never feel like that. Everything comes in place and you feel like, oh yeah, this is where I want, yes, this is exactly where I want to be. And I think about my least favorite plot thread out of all those, and it's still better than most plot threads that I've read in modern fantasy. So Ryan's just amazing. He's doing Dragon Fantasy the best I've seen since George R. R. Martin. And Of War of Ruin was just amazing. If it wasn't for Lonesome Dove last year, that would have been my favorite book I read last year. I got some Malazan love on here for you guys. The Bone Hunters, Stephen Erickson, 1,203 pages. And I joked about this one myself when I first started, and it's very tough to get into Malazan at first. There's a lot going on. It seems like every book the cast changes, the location changes. There's so much more new stuff to learn. Then you get to book 5 and it's even more of that. And you're like, oh my God. And people used to be like, oh, well, just wait till you get to book 6 and Malazan's amazing. I'm like, book 6? Are you kidding me? They're right. The Bone Hunters is incredible because you can open that book after you've read the first 5. You can go to *Dramatists and you're like, I know every single one of these characters. And it's the quickest that any ℚ book flew by for me. 1,200 pages, and it just breezed by because I knew all these characters. All the board was set, the pieces were moving, and everything was going exactly where I wanted. I think that battle, was it called ℙ𝕤𝕤𝕤? Incredible battle sequence. One of the best I've read in fantasy. That is just an amazing, amazing book. Unfortunately, I still haven't finished ℚ, so I don't know if there's one better, but that's without a doubt my favorite book in the ℚ series of the first 7. It's just amazing. Demon in White by Christopher Rocchio. This is also a little lower in the page count, 867 pages. But the thing with me in this is I feel like Sun Eater is a series where you got to kind of chew your food a little bit. I can't binge these books. I feel like they're so thought-provoking, they're so dense, there's so many ideas that are presented where I'm like, I need to slow down and think about this because they are philosophical sometimes in nature. It's very much like a God Emperor of Dune just kind of hung out with Robin Hobb for a little bit. That's kind of how I feel about Frank Herbert and Robert Hobb. Robert Hobb had a baby, and it was Demon in White. Because I feel like I always give Christopher the hard time of being like, dude, quit calling your book sci-fantasy. That's made up. It's science fiction. You got aliens and spaceships. In this book, I understand why. Because he's got the great houses. He's got a lot of stuff going on at Imperial Court and some major revelations that made me think, that reminds me of a fantasy novel that takes place in space. Demon in White is a hell of an adventure, but it took me 3 weeks to read this book because there was so much going on. So that's why I'll put it on here, even though it is below the 1,000 pages, because it's not that I say that it feels long. I'm saying it feels like it's one you need to slow burn because it is a slow burn, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it. It's one of those where I will still say Empire of Silence is my favorite book in the series, but I can acknowledge that Demon in White is the best book in the series. Does that make sense? I don't know, it feels like kind of trying to have cake and eat it too, but I do love me some cake. To Green Angel Tower by Tad Williams. 1,083 pages, and those 1,083 pages are like 6-point font because I can't believe there's any book out there longer than A Green Angel Tower. This is a book that was so large when it came out, they had to break it into 2 mass market paperbacks because the pages were too thin and they were tearing when people would turn the page. I didn't write anything, thank God. When I talked about this on the channel, I said this is the way that all fantasy series should end because it had so many moving threads, and it came to like the last 200 pages, and it was like a freaking tornado. It just took off, and I could not stop reading. I was already tired when I got to that point, and I read the next 200 pages because I was like, I'm not going to sleep. I can't. It's just amazing how well everything popped off there at the end. Everything made sense, and the way it came together was just brilliant. And it's easy to see why George R.R. Martin was influenced by Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I cannot believe that Robin Hobb didn't read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn before she started writing Realm of the ℚ because you can see those influences in those stories from Tad Williams. And I think Tad Williams was that first one who had the courage to say, you know what, we can take a step out of traditional fantasy and we can start to have some risk. We can have characters die. We can have big moments. There is no more plot armor. I feel like he was one of the first to kind of do that, to kind of take a step out of it. Now we're so desensitized to all the grimdark stuff and characters dying now. But you think about when these books came out, this was probably pretty shocking stuff, and I feel like it does not get enough run on these booktube streets. Amazing stories. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is great, guys. I can't wait to see these broken binding editions that are coming out because the artwork on it just looks, man, so good. I got one Western on here, and I kind of already mentioned it. Lonesome Dove, Larry McMurtry. I didn't write the page number down. So how about that? I know it's over 1,000, but Lonesome Dove, I've talked about it ad nauseum for the last 2 years. Easily one of the best books ever. When I always say this legacy takes time, but I did my top 10 list the same year that I read Lonesome Dove, and Lonesome Dove already made it. So I was like, it's one of those, it's like, you just know. When you're reading Lonesome Dove, you know this is one of the greatest books I've ever read. So if you want to say, this is the great American novel, I will absolutely stand by that. That's a hell of a pick. Lonesome Dove is one of those where you're like, I can't believe I just read 40 pages about them, about what they're going to put on a sign at this ranch, and you're riveted. You just can't get enough of it. No one writes characters like Larry McMurtry. He just has this knack, just making his characters just so memorable, and you got so many of them, and you always know who everyone is. So Larry McMurtry, one of the greatest writers ever. I can't wait to continue with those prequel books because Lonesome Dove is just amazing. If all the books I've listed here, if you read one, make it Lonesome Dove. I don't care if you don't like Westerns. I don't either. And it's just that good. Absolutely incredible story. And I think fantasy fans will like it because you could replace, cowboy hats and boots with swords and shields, and I feel like it probably work. It really is just that good. I know everybody's saying, hey, what about Stephen King? He's got some chonkers. I know that you love you some Stephen King, Mike. So you got to have someone here. Well, I got 3, so I decided to call this category the Stephen King Trio, because I got 3 of them here that I pared it down to. I could have done more, but these are the 3 that I've kind of got it down to. First, obviously, Stephen King's It, 1,168 pages. My favorite Stephen King story. This is one of those I tell people, you don't mind long books, this is the place to start. If you love coming of age, it's even better because it's got 7 coming of age stories in it. And the thing I love about reading Stephen King is when I read him as a teenager, you know, I liked all the stuff with the kids. It was really, really great. But the adult stuff was like, I haven't experienced any of that stuff yet. Reading it again as an adult, and I'm like, I love the stuff with the adults, and I still feel nostalgic for the stuff that's happening with the younger versions of Loser Club. So the Loser Club will always be right here for me. It's just one of those where I feel like I was the 8th loser. That's how I feel reading this book, you know, because I had these friends, you know, that's what it was like growing up in a small town. Now, thankfully, I didn't have to run from an 8-foot-tall, scary, you know, spider clown with razor-sharp teeth. That didn't happen to me, thank God, you know, and that's why I've turned out mostly okay. But yeah, that's a story that will always stick with me. It'll probably always be my favorite Stephen King book. I don't see anything knocking it off at this point. It is just perfection, and I hope you'll check it out. I got to bring up The Stand, right? 1,141 pages, because I think that this is the fantasy serving on the story here. It is classified as fantasy because you can see the Lord of the Rings inspiration. It's a lot of characters that are kind of walking across post-apocalyptic America. You know, the super flu kills 99.6% of the population, and they're all that's left. And, you know, they're having these dreams, these prophecies, these visions of somewhere they're supposed to go. And it is very much a story based on faith, the faith of all things, not just religion. And I get a lot of people will give you a hard time about the ending or whatever. I'm like, if you're listening to the message of the story and kind of where you stand on religion and faith, I think that those things might make a difference for you at the end. But, you know, I don't feel like you have to have any of those belief systems or anything to enjoy the book. But I think that you'll look at it and say, okay, this is very much like Sam and Frodo walking to Mordor. I can understand that because these characters got to make their stand, obviously. And the question is, why? That's why you should read the book, guys. Amazing, amazing, amazing book. And I got to end with 11/22/63, 849 pages. Again, that's a little under the 1,000 page threshold. But that's one of those where I feel like it is another journey. And what I love about that book, look, I am a humongous JFK assassination nut. I have read so many books about the JFK assassination. I've been to Dallas. I walked the trail that they say that Oswald supposedly ran in time that he probably couldn't have done. I don't want like a laser pointer shooting at me here or something like that, or video to get demonetized. I could make a whole video just about the JFK assassination stuff, but I have to do it on my other channel because, yeah, I'd get in trouble over here. But that was a thing that kind of brought me in. So it's kind of got the historical fiction if you want it. It also has that sci-fi because it does deal with time travel. But then it does something that I said, King has no business doing this at his age to write a book this long, this good, and it's a romance book. This is a love story, guys. Jake and Sadie are my favorite Stephen King couple. They are what I aspire to be with my wife. That is the best power couple I've ever read in fiction. I love it. That's my Romeo and Juliet, is Jake and Sadie. Star-crossed lovers, time-crossed lovers, everything about their romance plot is just so good. And it's one of those where, like, even you're like, I don't like stuff like that. It's really good, guys. I don't like stuff like that. And it's a beautiful, beautiful love story. It really is. And to this day, it's the only Stephen King story that made me just like sob, like open mouth crying. And I have the tear stains on the pages of my hardcover still from reading those final chapters. If you can make it through that last chapter without feeling anything, congratulations, you're dead. You know, I was like, it's just such a beautiful, beautiful story. And so I feel like with King here, I got you some horror, I got you some fantasy, and I got you historical fiction, sci-fi here. So it's got a little bit of everything here. But guys, those are my favorite big books that I would recommend that you read immediately. Again, I think there's going to be something there for everybody, whether you're looking for horror, if you're looking for some fantasy, some series, you know, because you can get to some of these sequels. You're looking for Stephen King, looking for classics, historical fiction. It's all here. I got a little bit of everything for you. But yeah, I'm not opposed to taking some sabbaticals, some big breaks from books. I'm on one right now. But in the end, I think as fantasy readers, it's in our DNA. We like some big old boys that are going to be some good door stoppers, you know. So I hope that some of these will serve you. If I missed any, hey, why don't you drop in the comments and let me know what you think. Do you want to pick any of these up? I would highly, highly recommend it. So drop it in the comments, guys, and let me know which ones you think that I missed, and I will talk to you there.